So a really cool thing about Eureka, in my opinion at least, which I guess matters because I wrote it and that's why I wrote it like that, is like discovering who the characters of other players are during play instead of being told about who those characters are outside of a session. And in Eureka, I mean, in just about any game where this is a factor, you could get some pretty surprising reveals, but Eureka has some pretty surprising reveals in store, or they may not be revealed. In the very first big Eureka playtest, one of the investigators was a vampire, and this was like incredibly early in design. Like, it looked very little like this. And none of the other player characters, nor any of the other players, ever figured out that this investigator was a vampire. I won't go into too many details, but like, they never saw her eat, they never saw her sleep, they never actually saw her like fangs, even though she had fangs. They just thought it was sort of a tick that she sort of like scratched her nose or covered her mouth when she opened her mouth. She would always like run to the front of the group whenever they were going to like knock on somebody's door so that she could specifically ask to be let in, and all sorts of other vampire things that were just because she was not, none of the players were told that she was a vampire. They didn't attribute any of this weird behavior to vampirism. They just thought that she was weird, but like otherwise a normal mortal person. And it wasn't until like a month after this 6-month campaign ended that any of them were told this information. Anyway, that was awesome. So, you don't show your investigator's character sheet to other players, only the game master. This still applies even if your character doesn't have any big secrets, because like if everyone whose character doesn't have a secret reveals the whole character sheet, then it'll make it really obvious which characters do have secrets. So like, for the sake of everyone who might have a secret, keep your character's character sheet a secret. You don't have to be like super strict and like serious about this. Like, it's not difficult to do. If everyone agrees to not look at each other's character sheets, then it's really easy to hide character sheets, even sitting at a small table in person. Of course, it's extremely easy online. But if you're worried about that, you can also try putting it behind a GM screen or like in a little folder that you only open up when you need to read it. I don't think that's going to be really necessary with anyone, like especially because it's all right if somebody sees like a +2 modifier, like catches a glimpse of that. If this is not a super strict thing, this is just like, try to do it. Try to hide the character sheets, and don't like tell everyone what all traits your character has. So character sheets, even for the same character, are redone for each adventure that character is going to be put in. So don't think of what is on your character's character sheet as like a lifelong commitment for like playing this character. I guess asterisks within reason. Like, if they have lost an arm in one adventure, then when you remake the character sheet, they still gotta have that arm missing and stuff like that. If they are a vampire or something, then there's still going to be a vampire. That is not going to change. But as an example, like the same character might have like a +2 in firearms and a +1 in athletics in one adventure, and then you remake the character sheet for the next adventure, and they could have a +1 in firearms and a +2 in athletics because they stopped going to the range as much and started going to the gym more. Things like that can change, and often will change. Tiers of fear is going to be a very common change. If they have like a really scary experience, it'll probably worsen something on their tiers of fear. If they overcome that fear in some way during the adventure, then like next time they might have it bumped to a lesser degree on their tiers of fear. And yeah, so Eureka is about characters solving mysteries, but that mystery solving can happen in like a lot of different types of situations, and you're going to want a character concept that makes sense with the mystery they're supposed to be solving. If it takes place on a cruise ship, you need an investigator who it makes sense that they would be on a cruise ship and get involved in a mystery there. A lot of Eureka Adventure modules will have more info in them about what kinds of characters are likely to get involved in this particular mystery, and you can talk to the game master about that because they'll have read the module. Sometimes it'll say, like, they have to be a certain profession. Sometimes it'll say that certain traits are excluded, like you can't include investigators with these traits. It depends. So a character, like a PC or player character or investigator in Eureka, is a person before they are their stats. The stats and abilities represent the person they are in like hard mechanical terms. You should not build a character with a particular party role in mind, like healer, tank, DPS. You shouldn't be building with that in mind. Even more like actual Eureka relevant roles, you shouldn't be thinking of building like that. Like you shouldn't try to build a party with a medicine guy and a knowledge skills guy and a physical skills guy, because Eureka parties of investigators are not a like specialized team handpicked for the mission. They're people who in the world of the game, they're people who end up loosely working together towards a similar goal, which is to solve a mystery. The fact that the game tells you not to coordinate party roles in character creation is meant to help represent that. This does not mean that you can't make an investigator who like knows another investigator, or like one player makes it an investigator who's like this other investigator's brother or something like that. It's just saying like you should not try to go for a balanced party. If the party has a gaping hole in their like collective skill set, that's interesting. That's going to create a unique and interesting challenge for them in gameplay. That's going to lead them to approach problems in very particular ways, which is going to be interesting. That makes for good and fun gameplay. I can think of a lot of Eureka adventures that I've played in where the whole party is like really lacking on like interpersonal skills, which means that there's no one in the party who's going to be able to like smooth talk past some guy, which means that because they can't smooth talk past this guy, they have to come up with another solution, which has sometimes been elaborate and funny and interesting. The one concept that will usually never be appropriate is a cop. Investigators are not cops. Cops do not solve mysteries in the way that Eureka is made for solving mysteries. Police have like departments, labs, legal power. They can call for backup. They can dust for fingerprints and then lie about it. Eureka investigators don't have that kind of institutional power or access to those forensics teams or anything like that. And so what kind of characters you make should really reflect that and not be cops. One last very important thing to consider before we get into actual numbers and stuff is that outside of some very specific scenarios, you should be making a character who is motivated to get involved and investigate a mystery. They're curious, they're nosy, they're a private detective and they were hired. It happened to someone they know and they're out for revenge or just to find out what happened to their friend. Whatever, but they have to have a motive to get involved in this mystery. What I'm scrolling past right now are some easy suggestions we put in to help players who might be struggling with a starting point. They aren't classes or playbooks or traits or anything. It's just a few suggested backgrounds, non-comprehensive of course. They could be an investigative journalist, a private investigator, a friend or family member of the victim, a survivor of the antagonist if there is an antagonist, an academic getting roped into this by other investigators, a friend of another investigator who is not that enthused but they're very loyal to their friend who is very motivated. They could just be a nosy meddling kid. And that's just a few possibilities to choose from. You can have a Eureka character from all kinds of backgrounds, as long as it makes them want to get involved in the mystery and find the truth, and they're very motivated to find the truth or do something about it. Once you've got an idea of that, a character concept, you can move on to the actual hard stats and abilities, starting with skills. Some people like to do traits first, and that works, but I'm doing it in regular order for the video. So every step of the character creation process is going to probably tell you a lot about the investigator you're making. A lot of it is going to be stuff that you probably didn't even know yourself. And that's figuring out who the character is going to be a big part of this character creation. And that's not some big cerebral thing. It's just going to happen through following these steps. The second step after coming up with a concept is skills. You can do traits first instead of skills first, but it's listed in the book as skills first, so I'm going to do skills first in this video. Skills are really straightforward. There's 22 skills, or 22 core skills, and when you're rolling 2d6 for your investigator to make a skill check, a skill roll, you'll be adding a modifier from one of these skills most of the time. It represents how good or bad they are at doing the sort of things we expect investigators to be doing in Eureka. Every skill has a rating between -3 and +3, or +3, with the positive numbers being better and the negative numbers being worse. These numbers will be written down in a skill rating blank on the character sheet, which should be highlighted on screen right now. A -3 says that they're terrible at it. A +3 says that they're extremely good at it. A +0 does not necessarily mean that they're quote-unquote average at it. Different skills have different average Joe Smo ratings, and not all of the skills have that kind of average at 0. Like, for example, medicine. Being a +0 at medicine requires a not insignificant amount of medical study, or like at least taking like a class or something on it on first aid. Each skill in this list has some like example ratings that like show you what kind of person might have that rating in that skill. A +4 would represent some kind of like top of their field ability in the subject, like an Olympic athlete might have a +4 in athletics, and a +5 or higher would be like superhuman ability. You can't give your investigator +4 or higher in the skills step of character creation though. The skill rating can't be higher than 3 or lower than -3. In order for their cumulative modifier to a skill to go higher or lower than that, it would have to have an extra modifier from like a trait or something. You're free to give your investigator any number between -3 and +3 for each of their skill ratings, but once you've filled them all in, the total of adding all the skill ratings together has to be a net 0. To be completely clear here also, when I say that the skill rating has to add up to 0, some people tend to misunderstand that, so I'm being extra clear. It isn't each category of skill that has to add up to 0. The whole thing, all the skills have to add up to 0, total. So you could put like all negatives into one column and all positives in another column, and as long as it balances out to 0, it's fine. There are 3 main categories of skills in Eureka, and one extra one that I'll get into later. The first category is interpersonal skills. These are like the investigator's like social skills, the ability to read people's tone and body language, the ability to be persuasive and say the right thing at the right time, that kind of stuff. At the bottom of each section for each skill category, you'll find like some helpful suggestions on what kind of like consequences or results from failures and partial successes on these types of skills might look like if the consequences are not like immediately apparent already from the situation that is happening. This might be a good place to look for that sort of thing. As a player, even if you're not going to be game mastering, it's probably recommended that you read this anyway, because it will give you an idea of what might happen from some of these rolls, at least if it's not immediately obvious. These aren't, this is not meant to be prescriptive or define what happens. That'll usually be up to the game master and or the table, but these can be helpful suggestions. The next category is knowledge skills. These are how much the investigator knows about certain subjects that we expect to come up a lot when investigating a mystery, like chemistry, medicine, like literacy, that kind of stuff. Physical skills. So physical skills are skills that are physical. Strength, stamina, martial arts ability, reflexes, that kind of thing. The physical skills, like all skills, are investigation skills and can be used for investigation in some way. Okay, so the extra one, the wealth skill. It does not count for any category. Like it's not interpersonal, knowledge, or physical. It represents kind of like your investigator's like economic class, but it does work like other skills. When they have to buy something really expensive or really important, they have to make a wealth skill check. If they don't succeed, they might not be able to afford it, or they might like take a composure roll for spending money that they don't really have, which is called a financial stress composure roll. The wealth skill might also be used as a knowledge skill for stuff mostly only somebody with a lot of money might know, like being able to tell by taste if a fancy wine has been replaced with like cheap wine or something in a mystery. Unlike other skills, it can also be used backwards for stuff that mostly only somebody without a lot of money might know. like maybe where the cheapest food in town is, or like what places you can sleep in public without the cops getting called on you. For that would be, you like reverse the modifier. So if it's a -3, you'd roll it as a +3. And if it's a +3, you'd roll it as a -3 for the opposite system of knowledge. Also, I covered composure in another video. The wealth skill is not affected by composure. Also, the wealth skill will have to do with like what kind of like inventory options they have starting out, or you have for giving them the beginning during character creation. But we'll get to that. That's like the 7th step of character creation. So there are also what's called write-in skills. All of these extra skills fit into one of the 3 main categories, but they aren't a like default skill that every investigator has a rating in. You can write as many writing skills as you want for your character, even though there's only a limited number of blanks on the character sheet. We just ran out of space. But each one has to be set at a rating of at least +1, and that +1, +2, or +3 does count towards the total skill rating, adding up to 0. If a character tries to use a writing skill that they don't have, then you roll like the next closest skill, but with a -3 modifier added. You can also write your own writing skills. I remember in one of our adventures, one of the investigators had HVAC, like HVAC, as a writing skill because he was like an HVAC inspector, like, you know, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And this actually did get used, the HVAC skill, like for investigation. It did become relevant and get used. Also, the 2 snoopettes for lockpicking and pickpocketing are snoopified versions of one of my friend Morgan's investigators named Kitty. You can see her drawn out in more detail in like the character versus character section after she intentionally provoked Yvette into like smacking her across the room to make Yvette look bad, and it worked. I think she shows up in like at least one of the trait, like the kleptomaniac trait. Speaking of traits, we're at traits. One of the coolest parts of Eureka characters and of Eureka character creation is traits. They're very modular and they help like make up a large part of your investigator's personality and turn that personality into a set of gameplay mechanics. Some traits can really change the way that your character like plays and interacts with a lot of rules. I mentioned that skill ratings can only go as high as +3 and as low as -3, but bonuses and penalties from traits are how you would get an investigator's total skill modifiers up like higher or lower than that, because a lot of them give skill bonuses and penalties, which will be written here if it's a contextual bonus, and here if it's a base bonus, and here if it's a penalty. Traits can also give like unique abilities and different opportunities to gain investigation points and different like uses for Eureka points. Every investigator has 3 traits by default. They have a minimum of 3 traits, but they can have up to a maximum of 6 traits. For each trait they have above 3, it increases the amount of investigation points they need to get a Eureka point. The default number of investigation points needed to get a Eureka point is 15, but if they have 4 traits, it's 18. If they have 5 traits, it's 21. If they have 6 traits, it's 24. I'm going to show off a couple traits, like the femme fatale trait, named after the noir trope of the femme fatale. I'm really proud of this trait, and also the Snoop design on this trait. Brandon drew it, but I came up with the idea, like how he's trapped in the heart and trying to get away and stuff. I should also point out that just because this trait has like a female sounding name does not mean that you can't give it to a male character. A lot of traits have like a gendered sounding name, but they aren't actually like locked to a particular gender or sex or whatever. Final Girl is probably my favorite trait that I've designed, at least in this list of traits, the mundane traits. I think I've never actually used this and like given this to one of my characters, but I'm just extremely happy with how it translates the trope of the Final Girl into Eureka gameplay, which I also have Morgan partially to thank for that, for a couple suggestions. Speaking of Morgan, here is another Kitty Snoopette. And I think the kleptomaniac trait here is a really good example of how traits can like mechanically encourage certain behaviors in the investigators and therefore represent personality traits during gameplay. Like how here, if they see an opportunity to easily steal something, they have to either do it or make it a composure roll. It doesn't force them to do it. It just penalizes them for not doing it. which is also kind of like a theme across the entirety of Eureka. It's like whole gameplay, setting, and writing thematically. The not finished yet Snoop is one of my favorite Snoops. Also, I think it, fits well with the trait. The bumbling detective trait is a really good trait for demonstrating how, failing rolls is not always bad in Eureka. So, this trait is going to make your investigator look like a complete idiot most of the time, but they're also going to build up investigation points extremely fast, which will make them not look like a complete idiot when they use those. And that's very good and quote-unquote powerful for investigating in Eureka. I think at the time of recording this, there's 74 traits in the main rulebook, and I think about 85 traits in total if you count the little mini expansions we've done, partially to contain spillover traits, the fan service files and the XXX files and stuff. Those are other ideas we had after, but the rulebook couldn't be allowed to get any bigger. If I went over all of the traits that I think are good, which is all of them, because if I didn't think they're good, they wouldn't be in the game because I'm the writer of the game, this would be a much longer video, which it's already ending up longer than I intended it to be. So moving on. So the Investigators with Disabilities step. This is an optional step. I'm not going to spend too much time on this section in the video because it involves some mechanics that'll be more relevant for the next video, which is I think going to be Life and Death in Eureka. Going to deal with hit points and injuries and characters dying. But in short, for this video, investigators can get permanent injuries during gameplay, and they can also just start with permanent injuries already in character creation. There's no stat advantage to this, just like there's no stat advantage to having some kind of disability or permanent injury in real life. But Eureka wasn't ever supposed to be about perfect and flawless people who have nothing wrong with them and nothing wrong with their bodies and are just good at everything. Some people are crippled from birth, and that does not mean that they can't solve a mystery. Next step, step 5, is Tears of Fear. If you've watched the composure video, you know what these are. When your investigator encounters something especially scary or stressful, they might have to make a composure roll to determine how much composure they might lose from it. And every investigator has different thresholds for different things that would make them lose composure, that they find scary and not scary, as represented by a modifier between -3 and +3. And this is where you determine those modifiers. So there's a list of fears that are mandatory and a list of fears that are optional. There's no specific requirements on where you put them. We just expect you to be realistic about it. If you put almost everything at the better modifiers, then you better be able to explain that. If somebody asks, why is your investigator not afraid of anything? Don't try to cheat it. All the fears in the mandatory fear list have to go somewhere on the sheet during character creation. And you can include as many of the optional fears as you want. You can even write your own optional fears, like writing your own special writing skills. Leaving a fear off of the Tears of Fear does not necessarily mean that your investigator will never be scared of it. If it somehow comes up during a session in a way that would realistically or believably probably should cause a composure roll, then at that moment you determine where it goes on their Tears of Fear and you write it in. Step 6 is choosing a truth for your investigator. This step is also technically optional for now because you don't have to decide it right away. You can figure out your investigator's truth during gameplay. A capital T truth is some kind of strong belief or strong bit of their personality that isn't represented by a trait and is likely to spur them into action or get them into trouble. Like it says here, it could be their quote-unquote need to help others even at their own expense, their dog-eat-dog attitude, their belief in people's goodness above all else, their pride in their craft, their love of conflicts, their insatiable curiosity, their cowardice, their excessive kindness, their thrill-seeking, anything like that. You can come up with anything as long as it is something that acting on has a tendency or a possibility of getting them into trouble or just spurring them to take action instead of stand by passively. Which does not mean that every investigator has to be action guy who always takes action. They don't even have to act based on their truth all the time. But when they do act on their truth, they get a +1 contextual bonus to their next 5 rolls during that scene. And they can get that benefit once per scene. There's also no actual limit on the number of truths an investigator can have, but we expect you to be reasonable and realistic about it. And also they can't directly conflict with each other. The last step is inventory, step 7. I mentioned at the very beginning that character sheets are redone for every adventure. You don't actually have to do that, except for inventory. Inventory is the part you have to redo for every adventure. So first, there's 4 spaces on a character sheet for inventory. So on-person inventory, which is like what they've got in their hands and their pockets and stuff. Secured home inventory, which includes the place they live and the stuff in the place they live. Secured vehicle inventory, which includes their vehicle and if they have stuff in the vehicle. Something to mention real quick about homes and vehicles is that they have something called a property modifier, or PM. For anything with a property modifier, your investigator can have a wealth skill check to determine if they've got something in their home or vehicle, even if you didn't explicitly write it down on their sheet. So like if the party drives up to a spooky cave and nobody has a flashlight written in their inventory, you can be like, I'm going to roll my character's wealth skill to see if he might have had a flashlight in his glove compartment of his car. And depending on the PM will be factored into that roll. You could also do this with like backpacks and purses, but the PM's way lower on those. Last is unsecured inventory, which isn't really inventory. It's just a place to write down important items that your investigator may have left at locations that are not their home or their vehicle. You can just use it to take notes or whatever, stuff like that. You will fill like these things out as the last step of character creation, and then do that again for each different mystery you play the same investigator in. So every new adventure, you wipe the investigator's inventory clean and you redo it. This doesn't mean they literally lost all their possessions or anything. It just is a way of semi-randomizing and determining what stuff they have access to for this adventure. So wealth points. You sort of buy things for your investigator for each adventure with wealth points, also called WP. Wealth points only exist for character creation, to be spent and like get items for the characters in their inventory before the game starts. Once you're actually in a session, wealth points don't do anything. That's what a wealth roll is for. So you have to spend all the wealth in character creation. To find out how many wealth points you have to work with for this adventure, you roll 3d6 plus 6 plus wealth times 2. And it also means that if that's a negative number, then that is a negative times 2, so it goes even lower. The times 2 is just for the wealth, not for the whole thing. You'll see it on screen. That wealth times 2 includes any wealth bonuses they get from traits as well. You will re-roll this every time you are redoing their inventory. It usually works out to about 16 or 17 points on average, but really poor characters tend to be more around like 10, and really wealthy characters can be in like the 20s, 30s, or even 40s. Also, you won't have to like pay wealth points for certain basic stuff that's also listed as basic stuff, like, you know, clothing, basic clothing, a wallet, stuff like that. So below that, there's a list of items in the game. This is not a fully comprehensive list, but there's a lot. It's a big list, and it lists their wealth point costs. Wealth points are not really equivalent to real world dollars, but I'm not going to get into that. It explains it in the rulebook. Something you're really going to want to probably make sure your investigator has is like a place to live, some kind of transportation, probably a cell phone, but like if they don't have the wealth points for that, they might not have one. If the adventure is taking place somewhere where they don't live, there's also like hotel rooms listed at the home section. Don't forget about necessities that you might assume aren't priced. If they are priced, wealth points have to be spent on them, like glasses and prosthetics if they have a missing limb, prescription medication if they need that. All that stuff costs wealth points because it's America. Something else to point out is food budget, which like counts as an item under the miscellaneous category. It's not a literal item in the game, of course. Spending wealth points on food budget means your investigator does not have to make wealth rolls for buying food every meal. Eureka adventures usually last between like 1 and 14 days, leaning closer to like 2 to 4. So putting a couple of wealth points into food budget can save a lot of potential composure loss or like wealth rolls to buy food and stuff, because they're going to need to be eating food. And I think that's it. This was a longer one, I think, but that's still an overview of Eureka's character creation. I didn't cover paranormal characters here because I'm saving that for another video, maybe. And also at the time of recording this, that section is still like mostly unedited and looks a lot sloppier. And you should really start with regular characters before you try paranormal characters, because paranormal characters are a lot more complicated. You can pick up a beta PDF copy of Eureka on itch.io and just like Google Eureka Investigative
Investigative Urban Fantasy, it should be the first result. We'd really appreciate it if you paid for it, but payment is optional. You can also get even more up-to-date versions, regularly, like monthly updated versions of the rulebook with a $5 Patreon subscription, which is the Agency of Narrative Intrigues and Mystery Patreon. If you can't afford to pay, you can still get a lot of it for free. Appreciate it if you would share the video and like the video, and tell your friends about the video, and tell your friends about Eureka, and play Eureka with your friends. Play our game. We really want that. Thank you for watching. Bye.